Hello, welcome to Philosophy Roulette number 146, where we read and review philosophy live on air. So, I was thinking I would do some of these. I've got this buildup of tabs here. Basically, got some music I listen to and then stuff that I was considering reading at one point. So, this is the oldest one. Let's go to Self-Intimation, Infallibility, and Higher Order Evidence. This is of reasonable length, and that's basically the biggest criterion I use to select stuff. So 12 pages double spaced is what I like to see, unless there's pictures also. Well, there's formulas, that's why. Let's see how bad the formulas are really. You know what, I've read other things with formulas before. I should not discriminate against this one, so we're gonna read it. I apologize to my YouTube peoples. I have not uploaded some of the papers in the last few days, but whatever, they'll be there soon. If you are in chat, you can... Oops, wrong one. Yeah, well, that's assuming I get the link right. If you are in chat, you can get the link by typing !paper in the chat box, and the link will pop back up. Otherwise, it'll be in the show notes below the video if you're watching this later. I mean, formulas are kind of like pictures, and you can get all the way into the theory of that. What exactly is going on with a formula, especially if you think of it as a picture or an illustration, not just as some sort of technical device, but as some sort of other sort of thing. So, anywho, Self-Intimation, Infallibility, and Higher Order Evidence by Eyal Tal, University of Arizona in Arkansas. Okay. Level connection principles describe entailment relations between... Ooh, this is logic stuff. Okay. Entailment relations between our justificatory status regarding a proposition P and our justificatory status regarding our justificatory status regarding P. Okay, so regarding a proposition and regarding P. Okay, two propositions represent our possible justificatory status regarding P. So S has or lacks justification to believe P. Alright, so this is sort of a justification and epistemology, maybe, is what we're talking about here. Let's find out what's happening. Four propositions represent our possible justificatory status regarding our justificatory status regarding P. Okay, I'm going to kill this person if I have to keep saying this. Alright, someone lacks a justification to believe that they have justification to believe P, or they lack justification to believe that they lack justification. So this is some sort of meta-level introspection or something like that. So you've got a positive introspection where you're the justification of the justification. It's not positive introspection, but it's sort of that, sort of like self-referential stuff. Thus, level connection principles relate certain pairs from the set consisting of 6 propositions. So your justification, you lack justification, then you're justified that you're justified, you're not justified that you are justified, you're justified that you're not justified, and you're not justified that you're not justified. Okay, and I take it you could go on ad infinitum. Call the justification P and not justification P bottom level propositions, and the next stuff up the top level. I mean, are they going to say object and meta level? I was like, yeah, I mean, this doesn't seem very top. It just seems like second level, because it looks like you could have a third, fourth, or infinite number of these things. A bottom-up level connection principle is a conditional whose antecedent is a bottom-level proposition and whose consequence is a top-level proposition. A top-down level connection principle is a conditional whose antecedent is a top-level proposition and whose consequence is a bottom-level proposition. So it's going from bigger to smaller or smaller to bigger, basically the length of these strings of justifications. Either once you're justified, then you go to you're justified that you're justified, or you're going from that you're justified to just being justified. So it's that's all it is how many of those things you have and which direction you're going, from big to small or small to big. We'll see how the bigness and the smallness matter. Okay. With 2 bottom-level propositions and 4 top-level propositions, we can construct 8 bottom-up and 8 top-down level connection principles. For convenience, we can represent all 16 principles using 8 biconditionals. Okay, so you can see 1 and 2, 3 and 4 are... okay, so it's basically iterating through all the different options here. That's all it is. That's fine. Some of the level connection principles represented by these biconditionals are implausible. If 2 were true, so to be justified then is not to be justified that you are justified. Or if 2 were true, for example, it would follow that whenever we should believe P, we should not believe that we should believe P. I don't know. I mean, I attribute that to many people I don't like. If they believe it, then they're not justified for believing it. I think that's a good insult, actually. So I'm quite happy to be with 2 in certain contexts. But it is clear that in many cases we are justified in both believing P and in believing that we are so justified. Well, yes, the most reasonable one is number 1 here. If you're justified, then you're justified that you're justified. and vice versa. It is also clear that in many cases we lack justification to believe that we should believe P, and we should in fact not believe P. So 2 is wrong in both directions. Again, I'd love to... This is how I insult people, so... No, or I have insulted people, so no, I like 2 in certain contexts. But that's fine. This is not to be disagreeing with the author. This is taking a context that the author is not considering and using it. But I find it relevant. But it's fine for this author. Some considerations let us rule out 3, 5, and 8. We are therefore similar considerations. Let us rule out 3, 5, and 8. All right, so they're implausible to say of yourself is basically what it is. Because you don't say, I'm such an idiot that because I'm justified in believing this, I should not be justified at believing it. Because then you wouldn't be such an idiot. Although, sometimes that might actually be like, I was drunk when I thought I had reason, so I wasn't justified. Maybe. Maybe you could do something. What was the footnote here? Okay, no, something else. Alright. We are therefore left with 8 level connection principles, which are represented by biconditionals 1, 4, 6, and 7. Of those 8, the 4 bottom-up principles and the 4 top-down principles can be paired as contrapositives. Okay. So, so if you're justified to believe it, then you're justified that you're justified. And then if you're not justified, then you're justified that you're not justified. Alright, and so basically they're also... this is making a nice little parallel between the 2 groups. Because they're just off by a negation, and it goes by the law of contrapositive in just classical logic. Okay. So basically we're reduced to 4 conditions. These remaining principles are quite strong. Combined, they yield a strict encratic constraint according to which rationality does not allow tension between what we should believe and what we should believe about what we should believe. Such a constraint is motivated by the thought that just as it is inconsistent to acratically, that is, in a way that the agent believes to be impermissible, it's inconsistent to act acratically. So to act in a way that the agent believes impermissible, it is similarly inconsistent to believe acratically, that is, in a way the agent believes to be irrational. If rationality prevents mismatch between what we should believe and what we should believe, no agent would be rationally permitted to have beliefs that are inconsistent in this sense. Well, depends how dialethic you are, but that's okay. But if any one of the remaining principles is false, it would mean that in some cases, the levels of justification split, and rationality sometimes permits a kind of mismatch between our bottom level and our top level justificatory status. Let us call these level connection principles encratic, not acratic, encratic now. Acratic, this is encratic. The theory of justification committed to them an encratic theory of justification. The problem is I don't know my Greek, so I don't know what the difference between acratic and encratic is. Oh well. This type of theory guarantees that we are never required to adopt beliefs that we may not rationally endorse as rational beliefs, and therefore carries significant appeal. Alright, so this is sort of a very classical view of the world, and it's very reasonable, where you just, look, if you're going to have some sort of justification, it has to be a rationally consistent justification. So you can give these nice principles that the author just outlined in this nice little picture right here, and that's very nice. Okay, so acratic is to be, I guess, inconsistent and irrational and permissible, and encratic would be the rational one. I'll just assume that from the presentation. Oh yeah, if anyone out there has any questions, please let me know. I know more people talk when it's less technical philosophy, but I like technical philosophy and I don't discriminate, so. Especially even some of the this is well written for the topic matter. It's not like literature, but like some of them are just poorly written papers, or at least they're excellent philosophy. They're just not great English. So in those cases, it gets a little tough. And like I said, it's most of the time it's the logicians. It's not the people who don't speak English, because I think they put extra effort in when it's the second language. It's mostly the logicians that are translating from the logic back. In what follows, I do not take up the question of whether the encratic level connection principles are correct. I focus instead on what these principles reveal about the relationship between bottom level and top level justification, if they are correct. We can begin by noting that some of the encratic level connection principles are derivable from others, assuming that the impossibility of contradictory justification. On this modest assumption, we can never have justification to believe a proposition and justification to believe its negation. Equivalently, yeah, so now we're getting the classical stuff. So, for all phi, not justifying it, or not justifying not that. So, given ICJ, the principles in row 1 of table 1 entail those of row 3, and those in row 2 entail those of row 4. However, a derivation in the opposite direction is not clearly available, as the principles in row 3 and 4 do not seem to entail any of those in rows 1 and 2. Thus, the principles in rows 1 and 2 suffice for an encratic theory of justification. Those rows include the principles of bottom-level self-intimation, BU1, bottom up 2, the conjunction of which has been called self-intimation thesis. Okay, so this one I was saying, it's like the introspection, so this is self-intimation, it's not self-introspection. Alright. Because of similarity and just sort of what's going on. Rows 3 and 4 include the principles of top-level infallibility, top-down 3 and top-down 4, the conjunction of which has been called the infallibility thesis. So if you think you're right, then you are right. Alright, so that's why you're infallible. Okay. So if you think you're justified, then you are justified. With self-intimation, that is, with the bottom-ups, we can derive infallibility, that is, the top-downs. Alright, so if you're justified to believe something, then you're justified. Then you can sort of get that you're justified. Okay. Alright, so this is just. There's nothing here. It's just doing the logic for you. I'm not going to read it out. Okay, but no similarly simple derivation of self-intimation from infallibility is available. So going bottom-up works the one way. I'll take the author's word for it here, but the other direction does not work. You can't go top-down instead. So given the plausible assumption of the impossibility of contradictory justification, we can derive infallibility from self-intimation, but not the other way around. Alright. As with all this is a general complaint I have, again, not this author specifically, but this is sort of what I consider a little bit my area. Why do we think the world is this way? We have not argued that the logic actually represents the world. We're just sort of assuming this breakdown of this sort of conditional, this sort of logic, this sort of thing, is the way we think of justification, and it was not argued for, and this is very common in philosophy, and it's just one of my bugaboos, so I apologize if it seems a little left field criticism, but this gets to me. So one of the questions, why do I think that this logic actually is representing what we think justification is in the real world? And so the idea that we're actually understanding something about infallibility and self-intimation is suspect in my little understanding of logic and how it's being applied. Okay, that's enough of the aside there. Let's just assume, for the sake of this paper, because everyone else does, that everything is just good. So everything is good. These entailment relations have not gone unnoticed. However, an important consequence of the asymmetry of derivation between self-intimation and infallibility has been missed. The asymmetry sheds light on what feature of rationality could account for matching between levels of justification, which self-intimation and infallibility together ensue. In other words, the asymmetry could help us understand in virtue of what the strict encratic constraint obtains. That is, why. Well, if we understand something about why you can derive one from the other, but not the other way around, there might be something important there. It has been subject of debate whether such constraint could be explained by the bubbling up of justification or by its trickling down. Well, given the trickle-down economy never seems to work, I'm going with bubbling up. If justification bubbles up, our bottom-level justificatory static rationally constrains our top-level justificatory status. If justification trickles down, our top-level justificatory status rationally constrains our bottom-level justificatory status. So it seems as though these rival properties of justification could both explain why the levels of justification never split. But notice that if the justification bubbles up, self-intimation follows, and if justification trickles down, infallibility follows. Since we can derive infallibility from self-intimation without substantial presuppositions, a bubbling up property of justification would explain why self-intimation and infallibility are both true, and so why the levels of justification never split. It would follow in terms, it would explain, where was that word? Would explain, right over here. This is, so justification would explain. It would explain in terms of, well, it follows from logical consequence. Now the question is, what is the kind of explanation that is given by logic? And that's an interesting question too. It's like, well, it is implied, or it's derivable from, but again, it depends on your conception of logic in some sense. What is happening with the inference from infallibility from self-intimation. Okay, so that's an interesting question there, the sort of explanation you're getting by the logical consequence. Since we cannot derive self-intimation from infallibility without substantial presuppositions, a trickling down property of justification would not be enough to explain why the levels of justification never split. A bubbling up property of justification accounts for the strict encratic constraint more simply than a trickling down one. I wouldn't go with simply, I'd say it depends on, it gets its simplicity from the assumed logic. Now, as long as we all assume the same logic, then it's simple. If we do not assume the same logic, then it might not be simple. But this is getting to the heart of the matter. It's like, what sort of logic is going on here? Self-intimation implies a surprising perfect reliability of our top-level justification. Whichever justificatory status P has, justified or not justified, we would have justification to believe it has that status. Importantly, we do not need to suppose that the information about whether justification is true, higher order evidence affects whether we should believe P in order to explain the reliability of our top-level justification. A bubbling up property of bottom-level justification would do. But does self-intimation give us reason to think that higher order evidence, HOE, cannot affect what we should believe? I believe it does. The basic idea is simple. Whether or not we should believe P, self-intimation guarantees that we have sufficient justification to believe the truth about whether we should. So if we wonder whether something is true, we need not look further than the justification that we already have in order to find out whether that thing is true. Yeah, this is actually, I completely agree with this point. That justification, you can't keep you don't need more justifications. Once you have the justification, that's it. And so this is actually, I think, an excellent and underappreciated point right here. I think a lot of times you see people saying, well, justify true belief, and then they have one set of like initial justifications, and then they get like truth, and they have more justifications and why it's true and then why it's justified. And I think that's completely wrong-headed. And so I think this is actually a very good point that is brought out by this paper. By very good, again, it's my opinion. This is not like I'm making any claim further than that at the moment. I just really agree with this point. Specifically, we need not look to what experts say about justification, nor about experts say about JP, nor to what we tend to form rational beliefs about matters like P, nor to any other source of information that seems relevant to whether we should believe P. In fact, since any HOE, higher order evidence, is potentially misleading about JP, the thing, and since we already have sufficient justification to believe truth about JP, using higher order evidence in forming a belief about JP seems irrational. I guess it might matter if you didn't quite have the lower level evidence yet, but like if you, then the higher order evidence might fall down to being lower order, because if you didn't have the justification to begin with, then maybe some higher order considerations might give you some lower level justifications, some bottom level justifications, but I guess that's neither here nor there, because that would mess up the strict lower level, higher level that this author has set up. Okay. A more detailed version of the argument starts with this assuming self-intimation. From self-intimation, it follows that for any proposition P, we either have justification to believe P and to believe that we have justification to believe P, or we lack justification to believe P, and we have justification to believe that we lack justification to believe P. This is an interesting assumption, because why do we have the second order evidence? I mean, this gets in the self-introspection literature. We don't always know that we have higher order knowledge. So why do we assume we have higher order justificatory information here either? Yeah, but that's very minor. We are thus in one of two possible kinds of situations, either JP and JJP, so either you're justified and you're justified that you're justified, S1, or the negation, which is this, it's very similar, it's just off by a negation. Let higher order evidence be information concerning whether we have justification to believe P in our situation as N. Examples of higher order evidence include expert testimony that our evidence supports P, track record data about how good we are in forming rational doxastic attitudes, peer disagreement about whether P, and so on. So defined, all incoming HOE as higher order evidence either suggests that JP obtains in SN or that not JP obtains in SN. So let HOE plus stand for the former and HOE minus stand for the latter. So plus is just the non-negated understanding of evidence, and the minus is one where it's the same thing, but we believe we don't have justification for it. So we can have combinations here of these things. Okay, so it's A, B, C, D for the different combinations. Now consider the proposition JP, so some proposition. S has justification to believe P. I believe I'm reading a philosophy paper right now. So I'm S and believing I'm reading a philosophy paper. In scenario A, the higher order evidence suggests that not JP in SN. So, okay. Since JP is false and the higher... Alright, so this would mean, in this case, since it's true here, then the higher order evidence is misleading, because you think that I would not be currently reading a philosophy paper, but I am. In scenario B, that it would be correct, so we have sufficient justification to form that. Thus, the higher order evidence is superfluous for the support about truthing JP. C, the next one down goes, well, everything is superfluous, because either you don't believe that you're justified not believing something that you already have, that you are justified in. And then, alright, so all of these are superfluous, because, I mean, they follow. Okay, so that's basically what this paragraph says. So, misleading in scenarios A and D and superfluous in scenarios B and C, because in A and D, you'd be saying something opposite from what you actually were justified in believing. Okay. So higher order evidence appears evidentially significant to JP in virtue of its explicit concern with whether JP is true in our situation as N, but there is distance between the fact that higher order evidence concerns a proposition that we care about and the claim that it affects the rationally required attitude towards that proposition. If self-intimation is true, we always have sufficient justification for believing the truth about JP. Incoming higher order evidence would either be misleading with respect to JP or superfluous to our possessed justification for the truth about JP. This odd property of higher order evidence should make us suspicious of views on which we must accord a significant evidential weight. If we know that some information is either misleading or superfluous in some way, in this way, it is hard to see what would be irrational with giving it no weight when forming our belief about JP. Given the higher order evidence potential to mislead us, and since we have sufficient and perfectly reliable justification about JP, it seems irrational to give the higher order evidence any weight. So we rationally may, and arguably must, form our belief about JP without regard to higher order evidence. Okay, so if you're going to form it without regard to higher order evidence, then you really, really, really need to keep higher order evidence and the base level evidence separate. And I'm not so sure that's actually perfectly straightforward to do. But I mean, yes, if you've got perfectly good evidence and then like someone's coming in with some meta level stuff, just like, be quiet, go away. I already sort of worked out everything that I need to know. So it's like someone coming in with one of those whataboutisms and like current political things. like where someone's coming in with sort of like red herrings, or what about this, what about that, what about this person. Look, all that higher order stuff, like things about the meta level, that doesn't change the base level facts. Okay. The discussion so far has proceeded in terms of which proposition an agent is justified in believing, rather than which of an agent's beliefs are justified. In widespread terminology, the discussion has proceeded in terms of propositional rather than doxastic justification. Therefore, even if one grants that higher order evidence is irrelevant to propositional justification, one can still maintain that it is relevant to doxastic justification. In that case, we may think it is sometimes permitted to form beliefs about JP using our higher order evidence. Moreover, I have been identifying what we have propositional justification to believe with what we should believe. But if what we have doxastic justification to believe matters to what we should believe, and higher order evidence could affect doxastic justification, higher order evidence might affect what we should believe. I will address these worries in reverse order. First, versions of self-intimation and infallibility that concern what we should believe seem just as plausible as the versions I have been working with, which concern propositional justification. The arguments in this paper would run just the same when applied to those former versions. As long as self-intimation and infallibility prevent mismatch between what we should believe and what we should believe, higher order evidence will be misleading or superfluous relative to what we should believe about what we should believe. Second, then, supposing that higher order evidence could provide a way for us to rationally believe the propositions that we should already believe, would not detract from the claim that it does not change what we should believe. This is the problem with logicians. They iterate. The analytic philosophy iterates. The trickling down story would remain dubious even if we grant that higher order evidence can affect doxastic justification, and even if propositional justification and what we should believe come apart. So while my arguments leave it open that higher order evidence could sometimes matter to doxastic justification, higher order evidence would still not make a difference to what we should believe. Proposition justified in believing rather than agent's beliefs are justified. Okay, so in some sense, this is pulling apart how we think about what sort of things we're talking about here. Either that your beliefs are justified in terms of like how you got a hold of them, or just some abstract understanding of that you are justified in believing some proposition. So I guess what this author is trying to do is cut off the counter argument that there might be more going on when you are justified in believing something, but they're basically saying, look, everything will still hold. This is sort of common to both, and they don't really want to go into the other section because they proved what they want to minimally here, that it would work for both viewpoints, even if there are other considerations going on. Okay. To conclude, a theory of justification that prohibits mismatch between the levels of justification is committed to the four-level connection principles that make up self-intimation and infallibility. These principles could be explained by a view on which top-level justification is somehow fundamental and swamps bottom-level justification so as to make it conform. But they are better explained by a view on which bottom-level justification is somehow fundamental and ensures that top-level justification conforms. Self-intimation entails infallibility, secures encratic theory of justification, and suggests that higher-order evidence is evidentially inert. Since it represents a property of bottom-level justification, if true, self-intimation would give us reason to think that bottom-level justification is somehow fundamental. Okay, very nice paper. I always like it when I agree with the author. And I'm not saying I agree with this whole paper, I just thought they made... there was something I very strongly agreed with in the middle, which is plenty for me to like something. It's like I completely agree with one little point, that means I like it. Because I tend to disagree with so many things. Someone called me a curmudgeon. I was like, yes, we are, like, philosophers are curmudgeons. Yes, we are. I completely agree with them. So let's see, anything else to say about this? This, even though it looked like a lot of logic, basically this was a lot of lists and charts. So this is a very nice way to make logic accessible, because it wasn't actually doing a lot of logic. There was only like one paragraph I skipped that was sort of a proof, but the rest of it were charts. They were not graphs, they were charts. That so that's pretty nice. the way they used the charts to show that really there was really 1, 2, 3, 4 of these things. You only had to count to 4 basically, and then there was like row 1 and 4, or like then there was like A and B. So this is and so they had one formula here. Oh my god. So that was nicely argued. Basically, if you're gonna do this stuff, this is a nicely argued paper. This is the paragraph here. Again, I have my concerns about the use of logic in talking about what we should believe. Like, why does logic matter there? But the author did touch on that in some sense. Well, not exactly. The question of what our understanding of how we believe things, like what something that we are justified in believing, or are we believing something that's justified. So that would make the justification sort of independent and external. But that's a bigger question about the status of knowledge in general. So the question is, but does justification go up or down, is what they were asking about here, and they thought they did a nice treatment. This is the point I like. We have to be very careful about not building. Once you have justification, then you have it. You can't just start building it in and start questioning what you were doing. Either you have it or you didn't. And if you don't like that, then why do you say you were justified in the first place? So it's just like you have to be super clear on your what counts to begin with. And if you're not clear on what counts, then it doesn't really matter. But this is a good point, because people get real wishy-washy at times. Alright, any questions from the gallery out in Twitch land at the moment? Otherwise, this will be it for this paper, and I'll be back tomorrow morning. So, short paper. I like short papers. Yeah. So okay, and there's one last thing. Yeah, why do we care about higher order evidence at all? Oh, that's the other thing. Yeah, why do we care about it? Well, maybe this paper does also create a turn on the fact that you have base level evidence and higher order evidence, and that one is not the other. And in some sense, that also comes out in this doxastic versus propositional distinction, but not necessarily. I mean, just keeping stuff separate can be just very hard. What counts as base and what is not in the base level or bottom level. So again, that might be something to look at, but it's a fine assumption for this sort of paper. Okay, that's it, and I hope everyone has a good night and stays safe, and I'll be back tomorrow. Bye bye. Oh yeah, send me something to read if anyone wants me to read something. I'll take your opinion into account, even if you don't give me a suggestion. If you like one thing or you don't like it, let me know too. Bye bye.